Welcome to episode 8 of the Various and Sundry podcast. I'm your host, Matt Harmon, joined in studio as always by my good friend, my esteemed colleague here at Grace College and Theological Seminary, my go-to guy for Mets baseball updates, John Sloat.
Yeah, not a lot of call for Mets baseball updates.
Well, I mean, I know you're excited about the fact that pitchers and catchers have reported. Have the position players reported yet?
Yes, and games started over the weekend. I actually listened to a game on the radio on Saturday, which is a lovely spring feeling to listen to baseball on the radio. So.
Okay, yeah, all right. So you wouldn't know it's spring by our current weather here. As I was walking in today as we're recording on this fine Tuesday morning, and it's, 37 and light rain, I was struck actually. I thought, this weather reminds me of Reykjavik from our mystery trip last year. Overcast, cloudy, wet, windy.
Oh, it's a Reykjavik day.
It's very much a Reykjavik kind of day. So, and mentioning that will prepare us for some updates here in a minute, but we should begin by noting that we encourage listener participation. So you can reach out to us on Twitter at V&S-Pod, as well as email the show, variousandsundrypodcast@gmail.com. We did have a listener tweet at us a suggested topic for us to discuss. Though we've contemplated it. We'll see. We've kicked around the possibility of addressing. There was a bit of a controversy at one of my alma maters, the
Trinity, right? Is that where the political activist kind of came in? Yeah,
not quite at good old Ohio University down in Athens. So thank you for that suggestion, and we will we certainly welcome it, even if we don't end up going with that. We appreciate suggestions for show topics and such. But we also want to encourage you, if you're enjoying the show, please go ahead and give us a rating. As John would say, only 5 stars, please.
We're only interested in 5 stars.
Right. And so far, I think we're at like 17.
Yeah, they're listening well.
Yeah. So
we do accept critical feedback.
Yeah.
You're more than we do accept it. Give it to us.
Just not there.
Yeah, we want the 5 stars.
Exactly. So in any case, we absolutely need to start, though, with a coronavirus update, because there has been breaking news, legitimate breaking news on this front. So, John, take it away.
Yeah, so Wednesday evening, Thursday morning last week, the CDC updated its level for a number of Asian countries, including Taiwan. And for Taiwan, they put the tagline, "There is a parent community spread of the disease." And what that means is that there are people who are getting the disease that do not know how they got the disease. They can't name where did they get it from or anything like that. In the same breath, they also, the government of Taiwan released a map of where all of the visitors from the Diamond Princess cruise had visited in Taiwan.
Okay.
Several of them were sites where we were about to go. So needless to say, we have sadly canceled that trip, as well as, I believe, all of our Asia trips for that, and I believe one European trip as well.
Yeah.
But the virus is beginning to level off, I'd say, in mainland China, but expand in other areas of the world, particularly Europe recently, Iran, and a few other countries. It seems to be exploding right now.
Yeah, so this will be the first spring break in how many years that you won't be in Taiwan?
6.
Okay.
6. This would have been my 6th year going, so
Gotcha.
I've gone 5 years in a row.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's obviously disappointing, but certainly understandable in light of the situation.
Yeah, and we were nervous about the quality of the trip for the students. Our understanding is that in Asia, people are kind of staying home, nobody's coming out, and if there is a meeting to be had, people are refusing to go to those.
Sure.
So what would the quality of those trips have been like if we had tried to go and interact with people there, and they don't want nothing to do with us?
Right. So there is our coronavirus update.
And we'll continue to bring coronavirus updates, yes?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm all in on that. I mean,
Okay.
you are my go-to guy for the coronavirus.
My level of tracking has not changed since my trip has been canceled.
We appreciate that. Yeah. I think I was hoping that as part of your role as the coronavirus correspondent for the various and sundry podcasts,
Doing it on location.
An on-location report would be in the works, but apparently that's just not in the cards.
Well, and we were secretly not hoping, but thinking, goodness, if John gets quarantined at a military base in California, what great content.
That's going to be, that would have been that would have been fantastic, but perhaps the Lord knows best on that one.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
So, in the world of sports, obviously the NBA is going on. You mentioned position players have reported. There's some initial spring training games for Major League Baseball, and the XFL is motoring on. But in terms of the sports topic for today, we thought that maybe it'd be good just to kick around a little bit that the NFL has made some proposed changes that have not been put into effect. They still need to be approved by the Players Union, is my understanding. And so there's been a little bit of discussion about these not necessarily rule changes, but just kind of structure to the season kind of changes that has caused a little bit of a buzz, and thought it'd be good for us to kind of weigh in on that. So
maybe we begin, Matt, with why change the rules? Well, like, why change what happens in an NFL season? Like,
Sure.
what's the summary of those, and then why bring them about?
Yeah, well, there's really one simple explanation: money.
That's my understanding as well.
At the end of the day, this is about money, and the changes in view are basically can be summarized as: first, they would change the regular season from 16 to 17 games.
Interesting.
And take away at least one, if not two, of the preseason games. And although there are elements of that could be linked to, you could maybe argue the case that they're linked to player safety, the reality is they're about money.
Yeah, I think they value each week at over $1 billion.
Right, and so the exhibition games, the preseason exhibition games, essentially are not money makers for the NFL.
They don't get the national TV contracts, those sorts of things.
And more and more, the high-profile players are just not playing. You know, so even in the earliest ones, they maybe played 2-3 series, and then the second and third and fourth string guys are out there. So not the best product for the viewers. Stadiums don't fill up, and it's just a money loser for the NFL. So they've decided to propose this 17-game regular season schedule, and to add one additional playoff team per conference, if I understand that correctly, which would mean that you've got one less bye now. So currently, as it stands, the top two teams in each conference get a bye the first week. That would change to eliminate one bye, so that the best record team in each conference gets a bye, and then everybody else plays that first wild card weekend.
And so another question: do they have the same amount of buys throughout the regular season? Is it still just one, or are they adding in a second? I thought I had heard they were potentially adding in a second bye.
That's what I don't remember. I think there might be an extra bye folded into that possibility, so I can't remember that for sure.
And so that would, in theory, take the regular season, or take the football season, and bring it all the way, instead of the first week of February, all the way to the end of February.
Yeah, it very much extends the season.
They're trying to fill the void all the way to March Madness.
Yes, which you have to imagine that part of this is obviously motivated by looking at I think it's fair to say, the modest success of the XFL in this current window of people are watching this, not on the same level as the NFL, obviously.
Sure.
But I think there's enough that NFL owners are looking at that and saying, that should be our money. Can we fill that gap between the Super Bowl and this March Madness window? Can we expand out into that a little bit and take a chunk of that ourselves? Now, one one might wonder, what do the players get in exchange for this?
Right, because they're losing safety, security, those sorts of things.
Yeah, and so extended season, and really the thing that they're getting is a 1.5% increase in the total share of the revenue that the NFL earns, which might not sound like much. So they currently are at 47%. That would be bumped up to 48.5%. And you think, well, is that really that much? Well, that actually, over the course of the agreement and given the money involved, means that there are literally billions of dollars included in that 1.5%. So it's not small change. It might sound like it until you understand the scale of money involved. So those are some of the things that they're at play there. So any initial thoughts you have on some of those changes?
A couple. 17 games would be the only professional sports league that has an odd number of games.
Yeah, that's very strange.
How do you work out home and away is one of those things that I have questions about, because right now it's a 16-game regular season. You have 8 games at home, 8 games away.
Right.
What do you do with that extra game? Is it neutral site? And the logistics of that sound like a nightmare.
Right.
They tried to do some of that with the preseason, and I think it was kind of a disaster, particularly up in I remember Aaron Rodgers playing in a game, and they didn't have one of the end zones done or something like that.
Was that a game in Mexico maybe? Was that?
Perhaps. I was thinking Canada for the preseason, but
okay.
maybe Mexico. And then, so that's one thought. And then I do know that it does, one of the parts of this is it does take how long a player needs to play in order to get benefits for the remainder of their life. It does take that and shrink that amount of time. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I think that one of the key pieces in that whole conversation is the lack of guaranteed contracts in the NFL. That the NBA has guaranteed contracts, and Major League Baseball has guaranteed contracts. The NFL does not. And
by viewership, I think the NFL still blows both of them out of the water.
Correct. And so I've seen some pushback of, wow, this is an amazing deal for the owners, and the players don't get much of anything in return. The owners get their extra regular season game, and the move from 47 to 48.5 in terms of shared revenue is not a big loss for the owners. But the players want guaranteed contracts. Now, you can understand why owners don't want guaranteed contracts.
Now, can you explain what a guaranteed contract is for maybe some of our less sports-savvy listeners?
So, from my understanding, a guaranteed contract basically means when it's signed, the amount of money in the contract is what you're going to get, regardless of whether the team doesn't want you in 2 or 3 years, you're still getting that money. It's guaranteed. It's locked in. Now, I think there are some, sort of built-in escape clauses on things like, if you end up committing some violent crime or something, like there can be voids to the contract. But basically, it's more or less, if you sign a contract for $48.5 million, you're getting $48.5 million.
Which is not the case in the NFL, right?
In the NFL, that's not the case. So even when you see these huge contracts for quarterbacks, what you'll often notice is that the big deal is the signing bonus. Mm-hmm. That's where they want to pile the money in, because that's upfront. Like, you sign the contract, here's an immediate $20 million right now in your pocket. The rest of the contract, if the team after 2 years decides, you know what, that quarterback's not working out for us, we can cut him. And the contract is basically no longer valid. So the team has full ownership of that contract, essentially. So that's a big difference between, say, the NBA and the NFL. And so players in the NFL understandably want that, but the owners have said, that's a nightmare. We don't want it.
Yeah.
So the fact that the NFL doesn't have to give into that is...
And it feels like the players have the leverage, right? Because the owners really want this 17th game, and the players are like, how about a guaranteed contract? But the NFL Players Union is notoriously bad negotiators. They're just miserable negotiators.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of like, Are they going to be able to do it? I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't see those guaranteed contracts. I think the owners are going to dig their heels in to the point where it's like they're not giving that up. I think it would take a work stoppage for them to even consider guaranteed contracts of any kind.
And I did see that baseball's planning a potential work stoppage next year.
Yeah, more fodder for the show.
Yeah.
Bring it on, right?
Absolutely.
So, well, speaking of work stoppage.
Ooh, good transition.
Our main topic for the day is the whole area of work. So as we've thought about this developing progression that we've kind of found ourselves on when it comes to topics, we began several weeks ago talking about singleness, then we moved on to marriage, then we moved on to family last episode. It seemed like one area that would be somewhat of a natural extension to that is the whole area of work or vocation, those kinds of things. So that's something that both of us have done a little bit of reading on and thinking and reflecting on when it comes to how to think about this from a biblical perspective. So let me just start with this. When you think about maybe cultural perceptions of work.
Yeah.
What do you think some of the most common cultural perceptions? You can go anywhere you want with that in terms of like whether it's different among generations, whether it's different among different communities, whether it's ethnic communities or things like that. Like, how do you? I'm just sort of leaving that open in terms of a cultural or even just from a societal view.
Yeah, I mean, there's like you said, a million different ways to go with it. Probably the most natural way I go is to think about work as being where I get my value and where I get my my sense of being and understanding of who I am.
So this is your personal perspective, is what you're starting with then, or are you saying you think this is a major?
I think that's a major cultural feeling.
Okay.
Is that our work, what we do, is where we get a sense of value, a sense of meaning, a sense of significance. I think Tim Keller would call that work as an idol. And then I think there's the other side of the spectrum, and I think we can tend to find those in work as an idol in major metropolitan cities. Certainly, I generally think of people in business who are just really chasing down their work and are working 60, 70, 80, 100 hours a week, really trying to find, like, this is who I am, this is my purpose and my meaning.
Sure.
And I think perhaps, generally speaking, this certainly isn't all the time, we tend to find those people clustered in big cities lots of times.
That's probably fair.
And then I would say on the other side of that, Tim Keller would say that the other end of that spectrum is work as idle, I-D-L-E. Work as something to be avoided, something to be done as little as possible. So not seeing a whole lot of value in our work, getting sense of meaning, significance, and value from other places, and just getting out of there as quickly as possible.
Right. The sort of everybody's working for the weekend kind of mentality of
yes.
So okay, so here's my question. You talked about the kind of the grouping together of those who pursue meaning and significance in their work, more tending probably towards larger metropolitan areas.
Sure.
Do you think that there is any sort of variation across generations? Because on this show, we've talked at points about, millennials or Gen Zs or boomers and that sort of thing when it comes to other areas. Do you think there is variation across these different generations in terms of their perspective on work?
Yes. I would say, and these things fluctuate throughout the generations,
sure,
right?
Absolutely.
So I would say my grandparents' generation and probably my parents' generation are really organizing their life around work, particularly men. Have a tendency in those generations to really organize their life around work, finding their meaning, significance, and those sorts of things. out of work. I would then say some Gen Xers, which are probably in their 40s and 50s now.
So people like me is what you're saying.
People like you tend to probably go the opposite direction with that. They probably saw their parents pour in hours and hours and hours to the office and leave them at home and not care for them and want the opposite and probably have overcorrected to the other side a little bit. Does that make sense?
So you're calling my generation lazy is what you're saying.
That's not a word I used.
I'm just giving you a hard time. I know what you mean.
Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
I think there's some truth in that. I'll let you finish because I assume you're moving on to the millennials and Gen Z crowd. I'll let you finish your sort of historical or generational survey.
And this is just my thoughts and feelings.
Take, yeah.
I have no data to back this up. This is just what I've observed. And I think millennials are probably drifting more toward overwork. Work as idle. And I would say particularly as we've seen the feminist movement move forward, I think we're probably seeing more women finding meaning, significance, and value in work than they ever have before.
Okay.
Is it a fair assessment?
I think in broad strokes, yes. I'm going to give a little pushback on or maybe not, pushback's not the right word. Maybe it's nuancing. Maybe we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I like that.
I think one factor that survey doesn't quite account for enough is the fact that when I think of my grandparents' generation, the World War II generation, basically.
Yeah.
I think that many of them, although there was certainly a sense in which they found their meaning and significance in their work, that's definitely true. I also think that they tended to get jobs more for the sense of, what can I do to provide for my family that I can tolerate? Mm-hmm. Rather than what's more common today is, what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
And then go try to find a way to get paid for that. That's kind of the mentality that is common, I would say, among millennials and younger. Maybe in my generation, it's maybe not. Maybe I think there's maybe a transition phase there, that there's some of that, but more in particular, I notice it in millennials and the Gen Zs, who, when you're talking with high school students, what do you want to do when you grow up, so to speak? Like, what kind of area do you want to work in? Oftentimes, and maybe this is in part, I think this is a little facetious, but it's in part a fruit of the gospel according to Disney, right? It's the follow your heart, whatever your heart tells you want to do, like, go pursue that and try to find some way to support yourself doing that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to figure out, what am I passionate about and can I find a way to support myself? But I think that the flip side of that can be that it undervalues some of the professions and areas where you're like, okay, well, you might be passionate about that, but that doesn't necessarily
doesn't mean it's going to pay money. Yeah.
Right. Like,
provide for your family.
And there's a goodness about, well, yeah, I'm really passionate about photography, but I'm not sure I could make a living doing that. So I'm going to work this job as a welder, which will provide good money for my family. It's good, honest work, and it provides a good standard of living for my family. And in my spare time, I can pursue photography as more of a hobby or special interest that's not paying the bills.
Yeah, or even something that's become, I think, big among millennials are the side hustles, right?
Yes.
Things that you can do on the side in order to make money. And I think of photography as potentially one of those things.
Right. And I think there are all sorts of cultural factors that play into this conversation. When I think about my grandparents' generation, many of them, and even my parents' generation, many of them were able to graduate from high school or college, and they found a job with a company, and it was common for them to work for that company
for the rest of their
25,
lives. Yeah.
30, 35, 40 years.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen anymore.
That's just not the case.
That is
Yeah.
not the reality of the workforce today. So that's a different animal than the recent college graduate today who realistically is going to change jobs many times in their work career. In all likelihood, they're going to have 5 to 10 maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a statistic. I think the average is, millennials are still teasing themselves out as a generation, right? I think the oldest of us are, goodness, in their mid to late 30s. And I think the average at this point is like 5 or 6 jobs.
Yeah.
And not just different jobs in the same career path, but like different careers entirely.
Right. And some of that is reflected in the so-called side hustle economy of, I drive for Uber on the side or things like that. Those kinds of add-ons. Now, some people do try to make a full living out of those kinds of positions, but many of the people who work in those are doing that on the side in addition to another full-time job that they probably have.
Including pastors. I know a youth pastor in Fort Wayne, Indiana, who has a full-time job at his church, and then will drive Uber sometimes on the weekends to help make ends meet. And I believe him and his wife both work full-time, and they still feel the need to supplement their income with this side hustle.
And, of course, there are all sorts of economic factors that play into that too, right? In terms of if you can find a job that is financially sustainable enough for maybe one spouse to work and the other spouse to stay home, that's a different animal, in which that used to be way more common.
Yeah.
Today's economy makes that much more challenging, where there is often the need for both spouses to work at some level to provide. Now, I will say I would give a little bit of pushback on that, because I think sometimes the kind of standard of living that is expected is higher than is necessary. And so in some cases, not all, in some cases, the dual spouses working is probably more a factor, more related to we just really want a certain standard of living than it is we just cannot survive on one spouse's salary. Sure. Now, I don't say that, again, that's just general observations. Obviously, that's not a criticism. I don't know enough about many people's financial situations to have any sort of opinion on whether that's them. But I also know of families who live on very low salaries because they're committed to the wife staying home and raising the kids or things like that. And they're not making very much money, but they find ways to make it work and make it doable. Whereas others would look at that same income and go,
there's no way.
How am I supposed to, how are we supposed to live on $35,000 a year?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy, but I know families who do it. So again, that's not a value judgment. I think before the Lord, every family has to kind of put that together. Every married couple has to put that together for themselves. But I think that we've probably covered some of those. We want to talk about some of the cultural pressures, societal. Let's talk a little bit now on the biblical end of things. When you think of the concept of work, what are some of those biblical texts or biblical themes or theological doctrines that kind of inform your understanding biblically of work, or how we as Christians should think about work?
Yeah. I think the first place I go naturally is Genesis 2, where God places Adam in the garden to work and to keep it.
Yeah.
And, that shows us a couple things. That work happened before the fall.
Yep.
And I think we could probably draw out from there in new creation, when God, remakes the world, that there will be work there also.
Yeah. I think there's actually explicit mention of that in Revelation 22.
All right. And then I think what else we could bring about out of that is that work is something necessary for humans.
Yes.
For us to really be human, it means to work at some level.
It's a created good thing.
Yes.
It's absolutely a good thing. And so I'm sure that there's at least some listeners who might, when they hear, wait a minute, we're going to be working in the new heavens and the new earth? Yes. But that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, and you and I have even done this in this conversation, work isn't just limited to a 40-hour-a-week job or
Right.
a 50-hour-a-week job, whatever it may be. It's really the totality of our oh boy, I said a good word and then lost my train of thought. The totality of our playing into society and raising children and keeping things together and working with our families and doing things like that.
And I think that when you consider, I would even push back into Genesis 1 in the creation mandate of be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, rule over and subdue it. All of that is embedded, has work embedded in it in terms of exercising God's active reign over creation through our efforts. And so when you consider in Genesis 1, I think that the focus in Genesis 1 is God creating humanity as a sort of to have a royal function, a royal role, to exercise authority, to subdue, but to steward. The sort of gracious, kind, benevolent work that is for the good of others and for the good of creation. Mm-hmm. And then in Genesis 2, which you mentioned, there's another element to it of almost a priestly nature, I think, in terms of through us, God mediates his presence. And so our work in this world is intended to have both a sort of royal and priestly capacity. And that's not just what I do every Monday through Friday for, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. But that's a broader concept of all of our efforts in this world really to reflect God's image through those functions.
So how is Adam doing that? So in the garden, right, Adam is given this high calling, priestly, royal, like you said. Mm-hmm. What is he doing to work in the garden?
Well, I think that you see one initial task that God gives him is the naming of the animals there at the end of Genesis 2. That in one sense, that's kind of the first tangible thing you see Adam doing is to mm-hmm. name. And really there is a sense in which that's a function of exercising authority to name these creatures. When it comes to the description itself in Genesis 2, there's the idea of to work and to keep it. And I think while that goes beyond what it just sort of being a gardener, so to speak, that it at least includes that he and eventually Eve were to be responsible for the upkeep of the garden, which I think you can determine based on the text and other biblical texts that is in fact God's sanctuary. That's the place where God's going to dwell with humanity. And so their job is to protect the purity of it, but also to beautify it, I think, to keep it in order through their efforts. And really, Eden, if you think about this, Eden was only one small part of the creation at that point. So their role was in part to expand the boundaries of Eden by bringing what was wild under their dominion and under their authority.
Those raw creation materials on the outside, taking those and refining those. And maybe that's even a picture of what we do, right? Right. We take raw creation materials and fashion and form them into useful things.
Right. And that includes, this idea includes both, I think, the creation of things, creation small c. We don't create from nothing, only God does, but those raw materials. But also the service piece, that the way that we interact with others and the things that we do for others. So work is not just the production of a product. It's also the serving of others, the caring for others, the doing something for the benefit of others, so that it's not just, that's to be creative is just to make stuff. No, to be creative is also to take what has already been created and use it for the benefit of others.
So it's not just about the bottom line.
Correct.
It's about the service of humankind, if we could put it that way.
Right, and what makes work so difficult now is the result of the fall. And even when you look at the punishment in Genesis 3, part of what God says to Adam is, by the sweat of your brow, you're going to toil and labor, and thorns and thistles are going to come up. The ground is going to resist your efforts. Now that sin is present in creation, there is this pushback. There's this resistance. And so that's what makes work hard, frustrating, difficult, that makes us think, oh, I just want a break from it.
Yeah.
Well, really, you don't want a break from it. What you want is a release from the things that make it difficult and make it hard and make it frustrating. And that's part of the beauty of the new heavens and the new earth, is that you will still have work to do, but every single thing that makes life difficult in terms of work will be gone.
Yeah.
So all the limitations of your lack of abilities, or the sin that results oftentimes from having to work with other people and the conflict that comes about, just the sheer physical fatigue that comes from putting in effort that is met by resistance, all of that is gone in the new creation. So if you think about what do you most enjoy doing in terms of thinking about work, that's what it's going to be like without any sort of resistance put forward in the new creation.
No, that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, so it's not like, oh, I can't wait to get to heaven to rest. Well, there's an element of rest there, but part of that doesn't mean a cessation of activity.
Sure.
Just like when it says God rested on the seventh day, he didn't stop doing things. It just means that his creation is complete at that point.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And that on the seventh day, that rest is continual, right? That
Yes.
seventh day does not end.
Correct.
In the Genesis account, which is fascinating.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that we could
keep
still
going.
go,
Yeah,
but we need to
work part two.
Yeah. So I think that maybe it would be good for us to give a couple of recommendations for our listeners in terms of books where they could pursue some of these ideas a little bit more. So we'll start with, I know you've got one in mind.
Yeah, I actually have two. Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavor is, I think, a beautiful work. He has a Center for Faith and Work in New York City that does a lot of thinking about this topic, about how faith interacts with our work. And then I'd also say Tom Nelson, I believe, wrote a book called Work Matters, and in there he sort of gives a pastoral account of why work is a good thing.
Gotcha.
How about yourself?
Yeah, the only one I'd add to that comes to mind really is Jim Hamilton's book called Work and Our Labor in the Lord. It's in the series by Crossway called Short Studies in Biblical Theology. So that gives just a good biblical framework for understanding how we should think about work and how it fits into things. And I think that's a good place to start. Those three would be good books
Absolutely.
to work with. So,
all right. Well, we've come to the segment of the program where we pick an athlete to chat about just briefly. In episode 8, Matt, who wore the number 8?
Yeah, so in terms of athletes for that, it seems to be probably narrowed down to Kobe Bryant, Cal Ripken Jr., legendary baseball player, shortstop for the Orioles.
And third baseman. He moved over to third base at the end of his career.
And he holds the Major League Baseball record, I forget the exact number, for most consecutive games played in. He broke, I believe it was Lou Gehrig's record, which was 2,130 consecutive games. I forget what Cal Ripken Jr. ended up landing on, but it was more than that. And you think about a baseball season having 162 games.
Even number.
And the fact that inevitably there were at least a few years in there where they made the playoffs, and he obviously played in those. That just the model of longevity that is pretty striking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then two NFL quarterbacks warrant mention here. You've got Steve Young from primarily the 49ers. I know he started off in Tampa Bay, which
BYU grad, right?
Yes, and played in the XFL, I believe, for at least a year or two.
Really?
Yeah. USFL, not XFL.
Okay, I was about to say, I was like,
The original USFL.
Yes, I did know that about Steve. Yes.
And then the other number 8, Troy Aikman, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, won 3 Super Bowls?
I believe 3 Super Bowls, yeah.
With that power team of Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin.
And now is a contributor in the booth.
Yes, he and Joe Buck.
Yeah, him and Joe Buck.
Yeah. So, and then, there's really not a lot of Ohio State players to pick from that. So, just a brief shout out to Stanley Jackson, Steve Bellisari, and DeVere Posey. But quite frankly, there's just not much to work with there. So when we come back to the professional athlete, thoughts on, of those 4 that we mentioned, where we're going to land here?
Yeah, I think in light of Kobe Bryant's memorial being yesterday, I think it's hard not to go with Kobe.
It is hard. And, he is arguably one of the 10 greatest NBA players of all time.
Yeah.
I think you can at least generously say 10 greatest. So I think, we could pick him back up at 24. He did wear that number. But just in terms of the timeliness of it, it seems almost sacrilegious not to go with Kobe today. So.
I agree, yeah.
All right, so we're down to our one thing we liked this week. John, what's your one thing that you liked?
Yeah, I ran across this app called Audm, A-U-D-M. Okay. I'm not actually sure that's how it's pronounced, but I think it's a safe bet.
Okay.
And basically what they do is they take news publications, whether it's from The Atlantic, New York Times, New York Magazine, and have somebody read them, and so you can listen to them on audio. And so it's long-form journalism that can be listened to. So when we did the David Brooks article last week, I listened to that on this app. They have a free trial for about 3 days. But it ends up being, I think, $2 or $3 a month, and you get the main articles from several different magazines, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's something I'll have to check out there. So it's subscription based then.
It is, and it's one of those things. If you pay for a year, you get far cheaper than if you pay month by month. Sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
How about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm going to go with an experience this past weekend. My son Jake is a sports management major here at Grace, and he, as part of his duties, occasionally gets to do the internet broadcast of both men's and women's basketball here at Grace.
Oh, very nice.
And so since I have some sports broadcasting in my own background, way back in the day, we decided it would be a fun experience to do a game together. So this past weekend, we broadcast the Lady Lancers game against the Mount Vernon Nazarene University Lady Cougars. And that was just a fun experience to do that with Jake and to get back to some of my sports broadcasting roots. So fun experience. Fun. Yeah. And then, so we'll see if maybe in the future we'll revive that partnership.
Did I also see you coach a intramural basketball team last night?
I did. I coached an intramural basketball team to a championship last night.
Wow.
So, yes. So the Indy Hall second floor guys have been dominating the intramural scene here at Grace. And last night was the championship game, and I had about probably 5 or 6 of them in my New Testament class. And I've been joking with them about their success and that kind of stuff. And so, they had joked about having me on the team, and I said, well, how about I come coach? I'll come for the championship game. So I did it right. I put on the sport coat, the tie. I brought the clipboard to draw up plays.
Did you slam the clipboard down at all?
I didn't get a chance to. Now, here's the thing. I was ready. If the game would have been enough of a margin at the end, towards the end, I was going to get teed up. I was going to go out of my way to get teed up. Unfortunately, the game was a little closer than that allowed. So Indy 2 still won, but
so when does the banner go up? When is the ring sizing? When's the ring ceremony?
I'm still waiting to hear back about some of those logistics. But the picture's up on social media, so it really happened. So that was a fun experience as well. That's a good group of guys, and I really enjoyed that. So, and the fact that I'm no longer coaching actively gave me a chance to kind of scratch that coaching itch a little bit, without any obligation or commitment. So
no practices, right?
Yes, practice. Talking about practice. Well, we've done it again.
Yeah,
we have wandered across our various and sundry topics. And so until next time, the Lord bless y'all real good.
Later.